Good afternoon, everybody. It is 2:35, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. So today's technical assistance chat is going to be conducted by Kat Rollerson and Dama Absher, and they are going to be talking about integrating instruction for resiliency promotion. Might sound a little different than it did before, and I think Kat's going to talk a little bit about that. So without further ado, I'm going to let them get started. Thank you, ladies, for presenting today.
Thank you.
All right, so we are a super small but mighty group this afternoon, and we are also using this to post for our a previous skill module we had in a similar area. So the reason the title looks a little different from what was posted is the resiliency approach, or instruction to build resiliency, is a model that's been talked about at our Florida DOE, and we'll reference some pieces of that approach to connect. But resiliency here, you can think of it as a synonym for mental health and well-being, because when we teach skills for resiliency, they foster mental health and well-being. So I'm Kat Rollerson. I am joined, like I said, by Dama. We appreciate those of you who are on with us, and we will be asking for some input from you guys in just a minute. But for right now, I'm actually going to stop my video because it distracts me when I'm trying to share and ask some questions. And Dama, if you would like to stop yours as well, that's fine.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the goals for today, I have district. I know I have one of my district coordinators on. Just quickly in chat box, a lot of us are TA staff with the project. Other than a district coordinator, what other roles are represented on the call today? If you don't mind chatting that in the chat box for me. I know I have a district coordinator on that I love and adore that I get to work with. Other roles that are represented on the call besides project TA and district coordinator. So if you think through the goals or objectives of this material, it's to help you with, as a district leader, what are the benefits? Why do we want to have either our district team or our school team spend a little bit of time working to integrate and align any resiliency instruction or curriculum that we're going to bring into our PBS framework? So that's the first little section. It's to kind of supply you with those benefits so you can spout those off and use those with your district or school leadership team. The second section Dama will start us off with is kind of what does that look like to really start to integrate and then end with this alignment action plan at the district and then at school level. And then throughout the presentation, we'll integrate in 3 there. So we will utilize resources, tools, go through some strategies from our experience doing this work a little bit that can help with your teams, again, either at the district or school level. So that's our goals for today. And the other Karen that just joined us, I saw you got bumped out, so welcome back. Are you, Karen Neef, are you from a district or a school? Just looking for that in the chat. Hi, Julie Hayden. All right, so first section, we were looking to go through the benefits. Why do we want to spend some time as a team up front when a new curriculum's coming in or a new program's coming in? Why do we want to spend some time up front to integrate and align? What's the reason we want to do that? And simply put, we know a lot, so we're giving you some summary slides that you can use as they're helpful to you. We are assuming on this call, or if you're listening to this later, you are already implementing a multi-tiered system of support for PBIS specific to behavioral systems of support. When we talk about building resiliency, there's kind of 2 buckets that we know you can adjust or modify or add in or focus in your multi-tiered system to focus on overall mental health or resiliency. So you see 1 and 2 there. We're going to focus on reducing risk and protecting or building competence or protection by teaching skills, a various amount of skills that we'll talk through a little bit more. Or the second part, and those can go together, creating environments through evidence-based approaches that we know support well-being overall. So how does PBS fit? A lot of times in a district or in a school, you're going to be asked, well, is this curriculum going to replace PBIS? We don't want it to replace it because PBIS is that foundational framework that we're already implementing, that multi-tiered system that we know focuses most specifically on number 2 there. It's going to help us build environments that we know per lots of research promotes mental health and well-being or resiliency in a school building. So the quick snippet facts of that is we know when PBS is done with fidelity, because a lot of you are working hard to coach your schools to fidelity, we create environments that are positive in nature, predictable and safe, We have a level of consistency there that really is trauma informed. It helps that predictable piece, and that we're using a school-wide instruction of skills that's effective for us. So PBS has already laid that foundation of a framework to focus on 1 and 2 a little bit more. And that's what kind of our topic is about today. So to add on to teaching skills a little bit, you have probably, especially if you've been with me a lot, seen this slide multiple times. It's in our tier 1 training. Just summarizes, that's why there's lots of words, what we know from research actually fosters complete mental health or resiliency. You can use those 2 things as synonyms. So in the visual, you see the indicators of we can build up positive resiliency factors like teaching skills that you see highlighted there in the blue, or we can reduce risk factors, some of those internal risk factors like anxiety, depression, or behavioral risk factors like disruptive behaviors, defiance, or rule violations. So in this particular one, we highlight both parts because the walk away from this slide when you're communicating with your teams is we have to do both. We can't just focus on reduction of risk. We have to focus on both sides. So that means teaching some of those broader skills like you see in the blue box there, gratitude, well-being, empathy, persistence, or self-efficacy, social skills. We have to make sure we're teaching some of those skills of us as individuals that are resiliency factors while focusing on those environmental approaches that are going to reduce risk, like the box on the right. And why we say your walk away is both, we have to focus on both, is because throughout lots of research across the developmental span, those who have both resilience factors and limited risks have the best outcomes over and over again, academically, socially, even physically, compared to groups of kids who only have that absence of risk factors. They don't have those risk factors present, like anxiety, depression, but they also don't have those strong social relationships or a positive or happy life satisfaction. So that walkaway point is we're looking at both sides. So when we talk about adding in resiliency or programs or curricula that's evidence-based to promote and teach skills, it's coming from that resiliency lens. We're going to be building on the foundation of PBS that already helps reduce risk in those environments that's in that green box over there. So the other piece that kind of puts you ahead of the game, those who are listening now or in the future, is that you're building on a framework that you've hopefully already started to establish through implementing a multi-tiered system of supports. Because over and over again, we're going through those benefits. A lot of times people will say, why can't we just throw another program in there? Or why can't we try ABC curriculum to be this magic fix? And what we know over and over again is if we embed it in a framework of things like a team that makes decisions, uses data to monitor how it's going for us, if it's being implemented as intended, and then gets those stakeholder pieces in terms of informing what it looks like, it won't go as well. You'll start having that bits and pieces approach. If you go in schools if you're a district person, or if you are in schools, you'll start feeling like we're getting bits and pieces of things, but not that whole approach that's really systemically planned. And we're going to give a little example here in our last section of a school that's really done that really nicely. So we give the metaphor of a bike, and you may have seen that one before, but simply put, without the pieces of the bike wouldn't work, right? Same thing with MTSS, those pieces of the framework, the school team, database problem solving, coaching, those ongoing effective practices, and monitoring implementation are examples of things that we need it to work well, just like the bike needs the parts to work well. And then we reference there, because that'll help you actually a little bit in steps too. Sometimes it's operationalizing or being really clear on the common language of what are the core features of the framework. And so one tool that your teams use is the benchmarks of quality for that tier 1 foundation. So we reference that, embedded it in the link there for you. So to build on that concept, as we go through some of the steps and then the example at the end, along with some of the resources that we have, if we know we're building on top of a MTSS framework, we know then some of the practices on the screen are the guidance of that framework. So we're going to select intervention practices that we need to fill a need. So today we're talking about adding in something that is teaching skills for resilience building into our existing PBIS framework. We're going to make the decisions around exposing all kids to it, that foundational piece. Everyone gets exposure to it. So we have to make some plans for when's it going to be taught, how's it going to be taught, who's going to teach it with what, so that we make sure everyone gets access to it as a piece of the foundation. And then we're going to be making some decisions, and we'll wrap up with that a little bit too, about students who might need more than others, some supplemental or more intense supports using some of those instructional tools. And then the last part is, if we're doing MTSS, even when we're talking about adding in another type of curriculum or program, we're evaluating, is it working for our students? Is it having that impact and outcomes? And then are we seeing it make that impact overall for all kids, for some kids if it's tier 2, for our most intense population if it's tier 3. So today's topic is on adding in those curricula or evidence-based approaches that might teach skills for resiliency promotion. So again, this is one you may have seen before, but a nice one to keep handy when you're talking with teams about this topic. Because we know a lot across the lifespan of what some of those skills are. We talked about it in the complete mental health approach. Here, we're just breaking it down by when we select curricula or programs, elementary age group, that developmental phase, and secondary and adolescence. And you can see some things on this slide are already being promoted by your MTSS implementation. So having effective academic mastery, for example, good quality academic instruction, promoting the academic achievement, core course success in secondary and adolescence. We also mentioned the direct connection of PBS in the second one for elementary, so that we're promoting consistent rules that can be easily followed. They're taught, they're developed with students. That's another protective factor you're already building through PBIS. Some of the other examples on here, though, are skills that we might select a program or an instructional curriculum to make sure we're attending to teach those social skills that promote resiliency. So like friendship skills early on are really important for kids, that they have those peer success relationships, so things that build those relationships, that we can control and manage our own emotions. That's important across our life. And that we have good coping and problem solving skills in secondary and adolescence. So if you want a little more detail, like I said, throughout, we'll kind of link things that can be in your toolbox. The embedded link there, that risk and protective factors across the lifespan, that will give you way more detail than the summary that's on this slide if you are interested. So before I transition to DAMA, the last connection in the benefits or the why, we wanted to connect to the current work of our state. There is a statute around our comprehensive health education and aligning in our health standards, some instruction specific to resiliency and character education. So what we've linked here is, it's a nice reference if you are a district person working with a district team, or if you're a school-based person working with within your district, you might want to access what the instructional plans are for the district, and that link will take you to the public record where you can see all the instructional plans for selected grade, and depending on what you're looking at, you can get more or less detail. So you'll get grade level, where it's going to fit in a course for some of those content areas, what curriculums or programs are selected. So you'll get some detail to what's proposed to fill this gap that directly connects to the topic we're talking about today. And this is my last one before I hand it over to Dama. As far as the benefits, to summarize from some of those slides, when you say, why do we want to align this? Why can't we just throw one more thing in there, or kind of abandon PBS to do something new? We know it's going to promote broader skills for kids that we know promote mental health protection or resiliency. We know it helps educators use common language to reinforce across a campus those same behaviors under our PBIS framework. And it's going to help staff. It is a stressful time for staff, so it's going to help reduce duplication of instructional planning efforts, for example, with this topic, and promote efficiency and use of resources. So if I'm a district person, I might supply, for example, an instructional pacing guide for the health standards that's going to support my schools, so that they don't each have to come up with their own. That's an example of reducing our duplication and promoting efficiency. And then last, we have, we have from the research in classrooms at the classroom level that have actually done this and integrated universal emotional skill instruction approaches within PBS. They have much better outcomes overall for their kids in terms of resiliency than those that implement efforts separately. So if I'm in This classroom, I choose to only do ABC instructional program, and over here, I'm only going to do PBS versus doing them together. The classrooms that did it together had the best outcomes, particularly to those internal skills of kids that we know promote resiliency. So there is your toolkit of the big why and what I can supply when I'm talking with my leaders that I work with on why we want to spend some time with integration and alignment. Dama is going to take us through just some brief steps of what this might look like when you're engaging in it, or maybe you'll get some takeaways from what you could do to promote integration and alignment at district or school level.
Thank you, Kat. Now we're going to walk through the how. So let's get into sort of the details of how to align and integrate and look at the best practices. We have this awesome tool that's provided by the Center for PBIS. So a lot of the slides you're going to see here are going to be taken directly from that technical guide on alignment. And we're going to review several steps for integration. And as we go through those steps, they're not in any particular order. So we're going to go through them somewhat in order, but how you implement and how you use these steps are really meant to work with your team. And we're just going to go through some of those critical features. So we'll go through them with some examples and resources to help teams. I love just a quote here at the bottom of this slide that I think really speaks to one of the things that can be really frustrating for schools and districts and teams trying to align and integrate work is we have to ensure that we are not adding competing initiatives and we're not adding things that feel contradictory, but really for us to sustain implementation, we have to make sure that we're integrating and aligning with the things that we currently have in place and ensuring that we're using best practices. So we're going to get into some of those steps and the how. To effectively integrate and align our work, teaming is essential. So you've got to get the right people around the table. Welcome to the team, so to speak. And teams need access and good use of data. We have to think about both externalizing and internalizing behaviors when we're looking at the skills that our students need. And sometimes we leave out those internalizing skills and skill deficits. You'll need a team member or team members with expertise in PBIS and expertise on providing instruction that promotes resiliency. Teams will need to have an understanding of the core features of both PBIS and resiliency education so that you have a better understanding of how they work together. And for teams to effectively plan for integration, you have to have someone with decision-making authority at the table, whether that's at the district or school level, an administrator who can make decisions related to the materials needed and resource allocation. So this is a quick district level example, and you'll see here, this highlights the breakdown of who was on the district team, why or what their role or contribution is. And you also see in this example, the team has access to data related to both the needs and initiatives currently in place and someone with district decision-making power. And then in this example, this is a school level example, and you see again who's on the school team, their role or their contribution. And again, in this school example, the team has access to data related to both the needs and current initiatives, and the principal is part of the team. And that principal, of course, has school level decision-making power. So we're going to move into defining the outcomes you want to achieve and evaluating existing and potential initiatives. So getting through steps 2 and 3. And with the right people at the table, your team can define the outcomes you want to see and evaluate current and potential initiatives, the initiatives that you're thinking or considering implementation. Essentially, you're determining what needs are currently being met. Are there gaps? How we know the skills are in place and what are needed? Are we only looking at those externalizing behaviors that tend to be disruptive in nature, or do we have a way of identifying students in need of support who are internalizing, maybe not disrupting instruction? And what does this additional resiliency instruction add, or how will it promote mental wellness? So just some of the things we want to think about: is there evidence that indicates this initiative or curriculum has produced desired outcomes in context similar to ours? So how do we know if we implement this, this new idea or new concept, that we're going to get those outcomes that we're looking for? And as a team, it's important to engage in resource mapping to evaluate initiatives you have in place before adding or integrating something else. So you want to think about, are you implementing current initiatives with fidelity? How will you monitor fidelity of implementation and student outcomes across current and potentially new initiatives? And another thing to think about is, how will your team monitor both externalizing and internalizing behaviors? So really thinking through how implementation of these initiatives will look, and how you're going to monitor fidelity and whether or not you're getting those outcomes. We're going to share some supplemental resources in the coming slides to help with these steps. So I know right now it sounds a little theoretical, but we'll share some resources that will help with all of these pieces. So here, this is a district example. So you see on the left side, we're thinking about the concerns. Remember, kind of doing an assessment of what are the needs, and then what are some of those desired outcomes. And then thinking about the current initiatives that we have in place, such as PBIS, looking at fidelity of our implementation. So what do our benchmarks of quality scores look like? And then any character building programs, any data we have that can help us understand how we're doing with current implementation of character building programs. And then thinking about the team decisions. So you want to look at fidelity and start with fidelity of your tier 1 framework, and then add in the character building program with schools as they're ready. So as you see that they're ready for that additional initiative to be aligned and integrated. And then we have to support schools and in their action planning. So from that district lens, really thinking through an action planning for the integration to make sure that adults have the skills and comfort with the materials, that they feel like they've gotten the professional development needed, and they have access to be able to really implement this character building program or resiliency building education. And then on the next slide, this is just a school, thinking through the school lens. So some of you may be district level, others school level. So we like to think about it from both perspectives. So as a school example, again, we're thinking about what those desired outcomes are. So in this example, thinking about for reduction of physical fights, we're looking at office discipline referrals and teacher observations. Some more desired outcomes would be reducing the need for intensive services. So we want to provide more of an instructional approach, and we want to increase instructional time and really promote that positive school climate. So from a school perspective, those are the desired outcomes. So then you do that review of current initiatives. You want to think about, are we teaching expectations with fidelity? Have we taught the rules and procedures? Are they posted? And do we have that school-wide emphasis on instructing students consistently? And do we have strong fidelity of reinforcement across the campus? And then thinking about that additional piece, the character building curriculum, we want to think about adding this in, and how we can, again, think about staff members, the adults involved, that we need to action plan for how they're going to be provided the materials needed, provided support and training for implementation, any instructional time. So from a school perspective and even a classroom perspective, we want to know that we have the time to engage in the lessons and engage in this additional instructional approach. And so we really want to think through the outcomes we're looking for, our existing initiatives, things that we have in place. We want to make sure we are doing those initial framework pieces with fidelity before we add additional initiatives or ideas. Okay. And then we have some excellent resources. These are just some little snippets to maybe be a teaser for you, but these come from the Center for PBIS provides us with a technical guide on integration and alignment. And so you'll see there's a self-assessment and action planning tool, which is great for teams engaged in this work and helps really speak to and speak directly to action planning. And then also the Interconnected Systems Framework Initiative Inventory. So really another great, excellent resource for resource mapping. So you can really think about what you have in place and what its purpose is, what type of need it is meeting or fulfilling if you're engaged in that with fidelity, and really think through the resources you have in place and do some mapping so that you can then integrate and align your work.
And Dama, I was just going to add, because I know one of my DCs on here, and then if Pinellas also, if you have initiatives that are already selected, this could be where you start, like just looking at some of the connections in the district ISF inventory. It helps just to promote those conversations and connect those previous steps that Dama just reviewed. And then the school level is nice for setting up those systems and those decision rules we need in an MTSS anyway. But specific to some of your integrated tiered supports for behavior and internalizing. So it's just a nice tool that you can use kind of any step in your process, but could be a place to start if you feel like you already have a lot of, for example, all districts have resiliency curriculums identified, but if you're trying to just work on that alignment of current programs within the PBS framework or MTSS, they're a good thing to start with.
Thank you. Right. So when we think about those steps, defining the outcomes you want to achieve and evaluating the initiatives, those existing and potential initiatives, we want to think about or think ahead to some of the barriers to avoid and try to learn some lessons from others. And certainly want to make sure that we're not using data systems in isolation or outcomes assessed and reviewed in isolation. So we kind of have to look at the whole picture, fidelity of our implementation and those outcomes. We want to make sure our teams are not working in silos. This is something that I've seen frequently when I was in a district and in the districts that I serve. So we have some great teams, but often they work within silos and are not really collaborating and working together for that integration and alignment. We also want to make sure that we don't fall into the barrier of lacking fidelity data. So we want to make sure we're doing things as intended, as they were intended to be done. And also have one of the barriers to avoid is knowledge of evidence-based practices. So we want to make sure that we are looking for practices that there's evidence to support their implementation, that those things have been implemented in environments and contexts similar to ours, so you want to make sure that you are selecting evidence-based practices. There are wonderful registries that you can find evidence-based practices. So there on the right, you see some resources to help us overcome those barriers. We want to make sure we have common goals, that we're looking at those outcomes regularly, that there's data sharing agreements so that we can collaborate. The integration of teams and really working together and not, working in silos and separated, because that often leads to duplication of efforts. And so those are just some things to think about, some things to avoid, and resources to help with avoiding those. And so Kat mentioned earlier those resiliency plans, and you can click on that link again there to see some examples of those plans that have been submitted to DOE. And we want to think about, when we're talking about implementation of current or new initiatives, who's going to implement that curriculum? So getting down to the details, what resources would they need? So beyond the initial training, is there coaching provided or some job embedded coaching and support to implement? And once we, really think about the who, when is that instructional time? So we're talking about the instruction of the resiliency lessons. When will that take place? And how are we going to schedule that time? And do we have the materials needed? What data will reflect if it's in place as intended? So that's that fidelity piece. How are we going to know that we are implementing with fidelity? And then what data will indicate it's working? So often we think about those outcomes, but we don't think about fidelity. We want to make sure we've got both of those pieces in place. So the who, what, when, where, and then how are we going to know we're implementing as intended? How are we going to know we're getting those desired outcomes that we were looking for?
Yeah, so again, thinking a lot of you from district level to schools, if you see a program, that an evidence-based program or a curriculum is not being used, these are good places to start with, like addressing barriers at that school level, like Dama said, of kind of some barriers we might need to remove to support that they actually happen. And then Dama, I was going to shift to your next one for the resources.
Absolutely. Just a couple of resources here to help teams in deciding. So we mentioned, registries and evidence-based programs that are aligned to your student population and needs. So these are some great resources that could help. Both provide examples that can help you look for options. So there on the left is selecting evidence-based interventions resource. And then on the right is our Florida Aware guidance that's provided. We've got links there that should take you directly to those resources.
And both provide some registries, like Dama said and mentioned, is a nice place that does the dirty work for you for selecting programs across tiers.
And then just a final resource to support teams in using expanded data for behavior and resiliency. So this is the data guide for enhancing your PBIS framework to look at those mental health needs. And Kat, I don't know if you want to expand a little more, but I'm going to turn it over to you for the next piece.
Thank you, Dama. So I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just a nice one because we talked so much in these last two steps about what's the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then do we know what things are done with fidelity? So it just connects the dots some on that. It gives you some district actually examples from when we had the Florida Aware grant a little while ago, but what that could look like. Plus, it gives you some ideas if you're looking for more of those community data sources. So I get the pleasure of the last couple of steps because this is usually where, like we said, they don't always happen 1, 2, 3 in that sequential order. They kind of happen all together. Sometimes a later step happens, you go back. I was kind of mentioning that with the resource map activity. But one thing that's really important, and we're going to use a school example that Julie Hayden will know really well that's on here, that just does a beautiful job of, has done this work and these steps, and what their end result has been as far as alignment in their framework at a school level building. But the step 4 is about those core features. So this one is one of the most important steps to integrate or align. There's got to be a member on your team that knows the core features of what the it is. That's kind of the first step there. So we're going to start with an example that's more of a district example to me, but could be used at a school. Coming back to our little metaphor with the bike. Remember, it's that framework. So if I am on a district team who's doing some planning or some collaborating, we're already in theory looking at the integration alignment of positive behaviorals, that behavioral MTSS with academic MTSS in the Venn diagram. Here, we're going to add on that resiliency education as another initiative that we're looking at integrating and aligning. So Venn diagrams are great for this, right? Relationships. But to the quote at the bottom, when we do this work and when we're looking at core features of these things we're trying to integrate and align, it's best if we can look at what's complementary or what overlaps or is redundant, so that we can make those connections for schools, if we're the district level, or schools, that you can make those connections for all the staff that are going to be using and interacting in these various initiatives, so that they can see those, you make those clear connections for them. It's going to help them feel like it's not one more thing, it's isolated. Some of the things that Dama talked about as pitfalls. So here you see some general definitions of what each is trying to accomplish. For resiliency education, you see one we have for resiliency education based on what we know from research that I walked you through in that first section. You are also welcome. We put the link there to the resiliency approach from our Florida DOE that talks specifically to those skills and teaching skills to students internally. From that lens, if you want another definition of resiliency education, that is the Florida DOE model in that link. It goes right with those plans that we referenced that you can take a look at. But the blue box is one of the most important things, and we're going to use it to walk through this step. One of the biggest overlaps of all these is it focuses on instruction, right? Teaching skills for development, academic skills. In PBS, we talk a lot about behavioral skills. And here we're bringing in some of those internalizing or those emotional management, those internal skills to us, but everything focuses in on instruction. So starting with instruction is going to give us the most bang for our buck with the common core feature. So this one, we use this slide a lot in administrator overviews that are new to PBS or school level team members that are new. It's in our little recorded overviews that you might have used before. To be just kind of a really simple reflection of what the core elements are. Now, if you want more detailed and more specific of what a school-wide PBS, the critical pieces are, that's why we reference the benchmarks of quality at the beginning as that school-wide fidelity tool. It really operationalizes what it looks like. But when you're just having conversations with staffs, with district teams, just looking at those core features this simply. And we said starting with instructional as a core feature to overlap would be a nice starting point here. So expectations rules, that's the core feature of PBS. We have schools define those, and then they define them based on their school context. They develop plans to teach them with routines and procedures. And then we use reinforcement as a way to follow up instruction and strengthen those behaviors. So there's the core feature of teaching. To give it a little more detail, some people like this one a little bit better because it's taking that teaching elements that I just walked you through as far as all of the core elements of PBS to narrow in on, here's what we mean by expectations, rules, routine. This is exactly from our Tier 1 training. That's how we train schools to develop them. For a district or school team, starting with those prompts there and those questions of, we're going to add in a resiliency curriculum. So where is it going to be added in? Who's it going to impact? How does it connect to our common language already built through PBS with school-wide expectations? And like I said, I'm very lucky to have a great school example just to show you a little bit about how they did that. But just that simple step of how is this instructional program that we're bringing in, how is it going to link to that common language we've already built that's illustrated in the green here as that core element or feature of PBS implementation. And then sometimes it's routines. So like, for example, a lot of the resiliency curriculums focus on stress coping or how do we cope with stress, a routine I might go through or a choice I might make as an individual to cope with stress. That could be an example of being responsible, just making those simple connections. A step above these prompts would be that we support from districts, we support our schools with some instructional plans or tools to teach those added in programs. At a school level, the beauty comes when you connect to the overall what behaviors we want to see with this common language, how these teaching tools that we're adding in are going to support us to build those skills. So that's just a simple piece of building on to those core features. And again, because we're talking about instructional curriculum for resiliency today, that would be the best one to start with, is that overlapping feature of instruction and how we can tie those core feature pieces together. So the last two, this is the best part, because in real life, when you're doing all this in like maybe a 30-minute meeting or really busy time in the schools, the goal here of why we wanted to spend this extra time was we're ending with some plans to help our implementers do this together. They're not seeing it as bits and pieces of something. They're not seeing it as something I wasn't asked about for that stakeholder feedback. And you're giving me tools. If I'm a school leadership team, maybe they're giving it to you. If I'm a district, I may be giving the schools tools to make it easier for them to implement this all together, because we want those broader outcomes. So this often happens at the same time or together. And the example I was going to take you from is from St. Johns County. And so Julie Hayden is my district coordinator there that's on. She also was a teacher at this school and did an amazing job. But there's many reasons we would use FCA. It's a K-8 school as an example here. But one of the main reasons we pulled them to use as an example is because they have done all their coordination and planning throughout their years of implementation through their PBS leadership team. And that's one thing Dama kind of started you off with, right? Was look at the team membership and who's at the table. And this team is wonderful with that. They have a nice representation on their team. The way they coordinate and plan is always with the mindset or perspective of the whole building. So they're a beautiful example here. And then you see the little FCA stacked up. That's their school-wide expectations. So focused on safety, committed to responsibility, and always respectful. That's that core feature of PBS. But one thing they did very early on in their leadership is they intentionally tied it to those broader skills. So when they were going to be engaging in PBS, they were doing it to align to this mission and vision they have that's on the screen for you. So they had some qualities that they wanted in all their students and staff. And that was, developed with all those stakeholder feedback pieces that we talked to you about in Tier 1 training, but it kind of illustrated for this particular building that broader skill set. So they call it That One Takes Flight, which is adorable, and then has the focus, leadership, imagination, the grit, heart. That with the vision below of looking at how we can break through barriers speaks to a lot of those resiliency factors that we were mentioning. So things like self-esteem and self-efficacy, building focus and problem-solving skills, a lot of those are illustrated in how they teach some of these other broader skills as part of their PBS framework. And then we noted the two that they implement this particular example because there are many out there. And of course, being statewide, we see lots of good evidence-based programs and practices come into PBS. In this particular building, what fit really well was they have a school climate initiative capturing kids' hearts. And district-wide, they have a character counts program that they use on the character counts pillar. And that's some of the added in instructional pieces that they build resiliency with through their PBS framework. But what's really awesome about this is when you are in this building, you can see the alignment. It's really clear what the goals are, that everything's visually aligned for what they're working on. But what's even better is here's some results when you have that planning and that alignment under that vision mission being our driving force. This is some results that they've had, and I can't do all of these justice, to be completely honest, but just seeing the bullets are examples of outcomes when you do integrate and align. So for example, when they do some of the practices, they're scheduled every year, just like we train you on implementation planning. Ooh, my thing didn't like me there. They develop the social contract, which is part of that capturing kids' hearts. They do that every year because it's part of building those broader skills that they want to teach and commit to. And then they include that in their ongoing every year training. So we always train our PBS teams that when you decide what those framework elements look like on your campus, you do continuous training that's scheduled and planned and hopefully led interdependently by your school team. And this is a great example of where that really happens. So what they wanted to include in instruction, they co-train it, it's included there. They include other groups like our parents and community members in their communication, like websites and newsletters. All of these broader skill instructional pieces are included in that communication around their MTSS or PBS. And then one of the most beautiful things is the onboarding process. So they do a training for each new staff that comes in so that they feel prepared to implement. They know the pieces that are asked of them for instruction. And in addition to some onboarding they get for academic instruction. So it's a really beautiful process. And Julie, I'm going to ask if I can put you on the spot for 2 minutes, if you wouldn't mind. I know you help with that onboarding process. Is there anything you would add to that?
No, we really do have to buy in because we talked about how there's 3 things we do at FCA and we do them well is PBIS, life school, and capturing kids' hearts. And when you step foot on that campus, you have to drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, and eat, drink, breathe it. So it really does become part of you. And as I mentioned in the comment, like the language of breaking barriers and taking flight really apply to at home as well, and parents' conversations. So it really is a great community with it all. We live and breathe by it.
Awesome. So as far as that integration line, that's why we use them as an example, that living, breathing piece that you can feel, and the connection across settings is just amazing. So even though they're trying to do a lot of initiatives to make it work and build that broader skill set, you heard Julie kind of speak to it, and she was a past teacher there and now supports that school. That's the kind of result that you get when you invest that level of work. And I know there's a lot on this slide, but wanted to connect a couple of things with this example. We mentioned their expectations. Remember, we said that core feature of instruction is one to really start to focus on here. They have their aligned expectations that they have a teaching matrix for across the campus. They define what it looks like by rules across setting. Their mission, excuse me, the Falcon State Flight, like Julie just said, that's one of their driving forces. That's an umbrella that they're using for why they're implementing. They support that then with the school-wide expectation assemblies that may be familiar to some of you, with how we do school-wide instruction, either initially or ongoing to those assemblies, because they are K-8 and they are fairly large. But in addition to that piece of supporting our implementers, it's really clear for all teachers in the building what the expectations are daily, where they review in the daily agenda how they start their day with circles and go through some of those instructional pieces. And that's part of that onboarding that we were just mentioning. So those various curriculum pieces are put together in this routine for instructional staff to know that also then benefits that kids are getting that throughout the school year, not just that initial instruction. And again, they're doing a school climate piece, so that environment's even heavier as far as the relationships within PBIS and their school roles that they're playing. And I just didn't want to leave you without the district connection, because one of the things the district does to support the schools is they offer ongoing character chats that are recorded as part of that curriculum that they can use in the school building and deliver as part of this integrated instruction. So you'll see a sample calendar there in that embedded link, speaking to some of those instructional plans. Couple more instructional pieces just because we couldn't help ourselves from FCA. So I mentioned the social contract a minute ago. If that's one of the instructional pieces that they're bringing in there, that is a routine they walk through every school year. Staff does it, and then classrooms do it. That helps build, you see on the list there, some of those broader skills that we might focus on. Kindness is one of the examples in the social contract you see there, but they use the same social skill format that we teach in PBS to teach what kindness looks like. This is directly from one of their classroom, like what it is and what it is not, what it does and what it does not do. So just to use that same instructional format for a broader skill. And then you'll see little products when they're focusing on those skills, like the kindness or throw kindness around like confetti. That's something that was on a board at the time when they're focusing on that, with little shout outs or examples of kindness from across the building. And the bottom is just another example of supplemental skills that they're teaching. The breaking the barriers, remember, was in their mission and vision. And so an example where they had this posted in the classroom, they can grab a blank word and they can add join us in the breaking the barriers. What words are they working on for goal setting? And you see some of those examples on the right, the perseverance, leadership, confidence. And all those examples connect back to some of those resiliency factors we were talking about at the beginning of the day. So really beautiful example. And I'll wrap that up with, again, all that planning leads to then not just coordinated instruction, but coordinated reinforcement. So like Julie said a minute ago, they use a program for points. They do a token economy, but they use live school that allows for points to be used as part of that token economy. They always have it real clear for all groups on what's being reinforced. So the expectations up there, the FCA way, along with those other broader skills. The visual there on the bottom is what that looks like for an instructor who's given the points. So just to bring one example out of there, responsibility is part of their school-wide expectations. The social contract skills are included there for reinforcement to make sure we're reinforcing that broader example of responsibility. So really nice example of how, yes, I'm sure lots of work and planning went into coordinating it, but the results of that are really beautiful for the school staff to be supported in implementing it as one MTSS approach. So amazing job. And this leadership team is amazing. So they are always willing to reach out and talk more if anyone would like that. So we are almost at the end of our time. And school examples before I dive into tier 2 and 3. Not only do they look at their student discipline outcomes, but they look at our ongoing framework tools, like our benchmarks, our PIC, our tiered fidelity inventory. But they also look at some of the fidelity tools of the things they're integrating, like the Capturing Kids' Heart. They use a survey measure for fidelity that they look at, just to ensure that piece is there, how it's going for us, and using that data that provides some feedback from stakeholders. So tier 2 and 3, we kind of went through the foundation. We just wanted to add in at the end, of course, you're always selecting, maybe you're selecting curriculum or programs that aren't just that foundational, they're going to go to all kids, but are going to supplement or support what we have as a foundation. So keeping in mind, this is straight from our tier 2 training if you've seen it before, but there's this fit there for any of the interventions that we talk about in terms of by function or skill needs, to link in some of those selected evidence-based programs to build some of those resiliency factors and focus in on those environment. Remember those two pieces that we can focus on to build resiliency. So there's a couple examples that we talk about in tier 2. There's many more, but mainly that second one, the small group, keeping in mind all the options that you might build in, but keeping the same guidance Dana talked you through with make sure it's going to fit the school context it's being implemented in, that they have what they need to implement it. So if it's a skill streaming, they have the materials, they've been trained how to use it, and are ready to go to start the group, for example. And then to tier 3, we think a lot in terms of tier 3 of individual counseling, and then we think of individualized behavior plans that are informed through functional behavior assessments. Same idea. When we teach replacement skills in that individual intense format, we're teaching skills that are helping promote resiliency. So we referenced a quick chat if you want more at that level, since we couldn't provide all of that today. But that one's a little bit about thinking functionally with those internalizing, for example, replacement behaviors that might overcome anxious types of problem behaviors. So to add on to that a little bit, don't forget about I'm going to put a couple examples up here because there are several. These were some examples when I said think about those groups. There are many evidence-based curriculums out there, and there's more every day. But just thinking through that match of need is what we coach you to do in tier 2. You see kind of the headers here with then some example curriculums underneath. And then on the right, another district connection is that mental health allocation plan. So we put the link there for you on that. A lot of times that's driving some of the selected approaches. If it's a therapeutic approach like Match ADTC, or materials, like if we're going to do the wellbeing promotion program, that we're going to select materials and fund materials through that. So if you haven't, take a look at your district mental health allocation plan. If you're a school person that you listen now or later, you might want to take a look at that to see what kinds of options might be out there that you didn't know about. But primarily those are driven towards tier 2 and 3 from the allocation plan, and then will have to be evidence-based by nature, but are sometimes reserved for our clinicians, like our school psychs, licensed clinical social workers. But they're still part of your resources on a campus to support that resiliency. That's just part of that tiered decision-making where we might be reserving them for certain groups. So last thing for today, we started with this. So the foundation is a multi-tiered system. If we're doing a multi-tiered system, we are always looking at is the progress being made? Are we making it with our foundational tier 1 and our tier 2 and 3 systems? So we just wanted to repeat some examples we've shared before from our model schools last year, because this is part of our model school process. We shared this one in the lessons learned, but it was a nice one to connect to the topic today because it was on social skills, which we highlighted at the beginning as a big feature of individual resilience. If I have good social skills across the lifespan. So when they're doing a tier 2 group, this particular school example, they had student outcomes to monitor progress. This is the way they monitor progress more frequently for students in the social skills group on the left. On the right, coming back to that core features step that we talked about, they track fidelity of tier 2 based on the core features of that social skills group. So any curriculums or programs that you select, you want to, part of making sure we have what we need is that there's a line way to monitor progress and a way that we track fidelity by those core features. So this was a great example by one of our model school awardees last year to a social skills group. And then we'll end with a tier 3 one. So in our most intense, I mentioned this a minute ago, but when they were talking about individual plans, this was one of our model schools from South Point Middle in St. Lucie. They had referenced, they used Prevent, Teach, Reinforce as their approach to FBA and then behavioral intervention planning. They have a teach strategy in there. That's part of Prevent, Teach, and Reinforce. And the part of the teach strategy was referencing that individual counseling approach and social skills. So when they monitored progress of that internal self-report of emotion management or subjective distress, that was improving, and just connecting with that graph over time as far as what those symptoms look like. So the idea that we've talked through, that's how we're wrapping this up, can apply across tiers. We focused, of course, on the foundation today, but if you want to focus more in on tier 2 and 3, you can always reach out to your PBS TA contact, and we're happy to help you do that. But I'm going to ask for our small and mighty group, and man, I'm proud of us, Dama, 329. So
Nice.
I'm going to ask for Betsy to add a survey because we really want your feedback, even though we're a very small group. And any questions, comments to add from the group? Please try to complete that survey for us.
Yes, so you should see a survey on your screen if you wouldn't mind filling that out today. That would be wonderful. And I just want to thank you both for doing this chat. It is so timely for me because I was just talking this morning with the district about integrating initiatives and helping to build a more more solid framework that integrates all of these different kind of mental health things that we have going on all at once. So it was very helpful for me. I always learn something new when I listen to you guys.
Thank you.
Betsy. So this will be posted, and like I said, we're also using it as one of our skill modules, so it'll be available if you listen today and want to share with others. We will provide you that link. And otherwise, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your day, and please complete the survey if you haven't already.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Julie, for adding into me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and yep. Okay. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.